So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whenever you're listening to this podcast. This is the TEAchers WORKroom Podcast, and we are Formation, here to discuss real-world issues such as politics, pop culture, race, religion, and social awareness from a diverse perspective. And today, we're going to switch up the format of the podcast just a little and get right down to the meat and potatoes of things, because we've got a hot topic that we want to discuss. And we want to welcome the perspectives of other educators as soon as we put this episode out. But before we jump into the meat and potatoes of this episode, this week, of course, we had a huge event that took place. And that was, did I hear some snaps going? Let's everybody snap it up. Yeah, there we go. That was the inauguration of our new 46th president and our vice president, in America. So let's sound off on it. What's the biggest thing that I guess you took away either from the inauguration or the start of this new presidency? Let's kick it to Leisha.
Okay, yeah, I'll go first. So seeing that we have our first Black or person of color woman as a vice president, I'm happy because, again, my motto is always representation matters. So this is an embodiment of that on a larger scale. My main focus and my main, what I care most about it is that I teach little ones. So right. It's to see this on the day of the inauguration. They were asking me so many questions because I kept referencing the Barack Obama administration. Right. And they were asking so many questions. When was he president? Because they're so young. They're born in 2010.
Oh my God.
Oh my gosh, you guys missed. You weren't even born when he was first elected.
Yeah.
So again, and that's what we wanted to do for young people of color, young Black students, is for this administration to allow them to, engage in inquiry about politics and.
Here goes a little provocative question here. Hopefully we don't take it too long, but I've heard this week that now that, our Madam Vice President is a woman of color, but throughout her campaign has been saying that she's a Black woman and a woman of South Asian descent. And so it came out that in referring to this historic moment, that we need to be more specific with our language and say that she's a Black woman and a woman of South Asian descent, rather than saying that she's a woman of color. So, do we have any particular feelings about that? Come on!
I don't know. Doctor, you take this one away.
For me, I don't. I think that if that's her identity markers, if those are, then I think we should respect it and say,
Black woman
who happens to be of South Asian descent.
Yeah. Leisha?
Yeah, I would agree. It's such a touchy subject, and it makes me think of our episode last week, where people can have several identity markers, and I guess the best thing is to accept what someone wants you to accept them as. If we're thinking about inclusivity, inclusiveness.
But what about the term people of color though? Used as a blanket term to describe non-white people.
Oh, so with that, I have a problem because people of color and Black people have very different plights in America. So I don't think all the time it is appropriate to use a blanket statement.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that as a, if you will, person of color, we have various identity markers, even within being Black. You have Caribbean, you have, South American, you have Hispanic. you know, you have different variations. So, I mean, like you said, that's another topic for a whole nother subject, but I don't feel any way towards her wanting to be identified as such.
Gotcha. And what are your thoughts on this first week of this new presidency?
You know, watching the inauguration was very reflective of the times, if you will, right? And I was forced to think about the women's suffrage movement and how we have come so far in terms of women not being able to vote, and then, you know, Sojourner Truth and other respectable, you know, women standing up for these rights. And then, you know, you see now, you know, like we always make reference to, you know, I am the dream that Martin was talking about, but like look at you know, Kamala, you know, you look at even Michelle Obama, you know, and you think about like Ain't I a Woman, right? and how, you know, Sojourner Truth, you know, really stood up in her truth.
Right.
So, you know, we have to always reach back to our ancestors and give credit where credit is due, if you will.
Yeah. That's an excellent point. And I think that Sojourner Truth speech, I think I'm going to do that for our audience for next week, you know, on our Think About It Tuesdays. Yeah, that's
for sure.
You know, I know for me, the thing that I was more focused on and continue to be focused on are the executive orders that were passed, right? Especially the ones around the coronavirus relief package, particularly the one that pertains to the support to be given to schools for reopening. You know, I'm going to be honest, it's coming up on a year now, and I definitely want to be back in the building. I'll be honest, I didn't feel that way with the former person in the White House being there, you know? But I can say that the night of inauguration, I woke up the following morning re-energized and like revitalized and all of these words, ready to get it, you know, go get it, you know, go get your blessings, you know, kind of thing. And so I'm ready to get back into the school. And talking about schools, and getting back to work, let's pivot to the meat and potatoes of our podcast today, and it is around lesson plans. So this week, a post was put up by Teach Mr. Reed on Instagram. Shout out to Teach Mr. Reed on Instagram. And the post posited or put out there that there is no reason teachers should be mandated to turn in lesson plans, right? So I want to say it again, because to me, the operative words in here, or the operative words in here are no reason and mandated. Those are the three operative words for me. So I'm going to say it one more time. There is no reason teachers should be mandated to turn in lesson plans. First reactions to that. What with you, Dr. Bethel?
Well, as a school leader, I definitely do think that teachers should, and I use the term, like you said, loosely mandated, right? I would say required, highly suggested. They should submit lesson plans on several bases, right? Number one being that you should know what is happening in classes, and not just from a leader's perspective. I'm thinking about from a parent's perspective. I'm thinking about from even if we have like visitors or anybody, I as a leader want to know the quality of the instruction, but not also, also to support where can I, as a school leader, support in the implementation of such or said lesson? So I definitely think that teachers should be required to submit lesson plans.
So what I'm hearing from you, Dr. Bethel, is that it's about ensuring and assuring that that instruction is of quality, right? Of a certain quality. And you, from wearing the lens of a school leader, that's one of the ways that you can ensure that quality instruction is being delivered, but also can better support the teacher, right? Is by these lesson plans coming across your desk.
Oh, for sure. And then also another point, and not to take too much time, is, not just checks and balances, right? Just checking off boxes, but more so around, we'll get into accountability as well. But more so around, like teaching and learning. How do you know what you should be teaching if you're not collecting the data, if you're not, progress monitoring ongoing?
Okay. So Miss Leisha, permit me to say that, you are now a coach. Yeah. So a recent one. So you have one foot in classroom instruction and one foot in coaching someone else who does classroom instruction. So I am sure that your perspective here is one that is interesting and might be different. So what's your reaction to that post, that there's no reason teachers should be mandated to submit lesson plans?
Yeah, so from the teacher lens, so from Ms. Williams inside the classroom, I'm naturally a planner, not just in my work life, but also in my personal life. For me, it's an entire process where planning a lesson is a prerequisite to executing. To me, that process makes sense. So for me, I can't even internalize or understand how I would go into work. Let's just say like today's Sunday, tomorrow I'll go into work on Monday if we were in person. And I'm just like, great. Like what would even be the starting point if I had no lesson plan, right? Now I wonder, because he did say they shouldn't be mandated. Does that mean that teachers should plan how they see fit, or they should not have to follow the process or procedure as we know it as lesson plans? You do your lesson plans for the week, you give them in a week early or 2 weeks early, your coach gives you feedback, you implement. You understand what I'm saying? Like, I wonder is that what he's talking about, the formality of it, or you shouldn't have to plan before you step in front of kids, because that's just like, absolutely not.
think that missing from the post, of course, because it is online, is the context, right? And in itself, it's a provocative statement to make. But, to go back to you, I want to ask you a question to build on what you just said. So you said that you can't envision getting in front of a class without an actual plan, right? Because your lesson plan is your roadmap as a teacher. But do you think that you should be mandated to submit it or to turn it in? That's what the post is getting to.
Okay, yeah. Okay, got you. So that clears up my clarifying question. And I do think so, yeah. So along the lines of what Dr. Bethel was saying, and me being a coach, absolutely. There's no way that I would be able to support you in the moment or long term if I didn't know what your plan was. So let's just say, for instance, we know that coaches walk around the school building. I step into a classroom where my coachee is leading a lesson. It helps me to have that context, meaning I've received these lesson plans a week in advance, so I know what book they're reading, what they're getting at, or what the culmination of the lesson is on Monday, on Tuesday, and as a week, right? If I didn't have all that context, it's kind of that thing that we used to always talk about, right? Like coaches just coming into our classroom, looking for the negative, looking for blanket or just benign feedback to give. Oh, students are not, the student didn't comply with your directions for this. And we would say, I'm looking for more instructional feedback. But as a coach, you're going to be inadequate and not able to give instructional feedback if you also haven't not to the level as the teacher internalize the lessons, but have some broad spectrum of what's going on in the class, what unit they're in, what novel they're reading, what's the overarching key takeaways from this unit. So I think it is absolutely necessary for, lesson plans to be submitted for the purpose of being supported by your coaches and other admin around the school building.
I'll be honest. When I first started teaching in the classroom, I did not like that I was required to turn in lesson plans. Because for me, it's like, trust, you hired me for this job, right? You've seen the number of years experience I have based on my resume. In my interview and everything like that, you collected all the data about what are my strengths, what are my areas of growth, so on and so forth, right? And so when I first started teaching in schools, I was coming from instruction in a different setting, right? But it was still instruction nonetheless. And so I didn't feel like, okay, well, why are you asking me to submit these lesson plans? This is like, I feel like you're treating me like a beginner, and this is kind of elementary, and so on and so forth. As time went on, though, my perspective did change, and I think that one, it was after failing significantly as a teacher my first year, and then understanding or having to come to terms with the fact that my planning played a role in my failure in the first year, or rather my lack of planning, right? My lack of good quality planning, right? To the point where, I started to co-plan with Scylla, right? Because after the first year and we saw those scores and stuff like that, it was like, listen, girl, I need to fix this right now, honey. I'm about to lose my job, so let's sit together and let's plan some of this together. And then I started seeing how having a strong plan could improve the results in my classroom. So yeah, but then the part about turning it in, though, I still was not 100% behind, because I'm like, all right, I got my plan. I don't want to be in a schedule to have to turn this in, because I might change the plan the morning of the lesson, because that's just the type of teacher that I am. I might hear something on my drive to work and be like, oh, this is the thing that I need to put in this lesson. Forget that plan. I need to switch directions, right? So I didn't necessarily want to be beholden to a plan that was submitted. However, when I entered leadership, kind of like what you were saying, Dr. Bethel, I was like, so I need this plan in order to better support you as the teacher. Because yes, I trust you, and yes, I'm invested in your growth, and yes, I know that everything in the classroom doesn't necessarily work out in the way that it is planned on paper.
Right.
However, I do want to ensure that we both have a roadmap for your lessons, so that I can support you and you can inform me, so that when I walk into your classroom, I'm aware to some degree of what you're actually doing, which then in our debrief conversations expedites things, because I don't have to ask questions about things that I saw or heard, or because it's already in the plan and I have some sort of information. But I think what's important for us to acknowledge, to identify and acknowledge here, is that we're particularly coming from schools in most recent years that have a particular structure and systems that support or allow for a coach versus coachee kind of relationship, where it's not the principal that is the end-all be-all of these types of things, right? However, Dr. Bethel, you do have both experiences, right? Being in the public DOE kind of state school versus the public charter school. So maybe you might be able to speak to how they're different. Because one of the things that came through a lot in the comments were the capacity for the principal or the leader to even review and provide quality feedback on these lesson plans.
Yes, many points that both you and Leisha make that are very poignant, right? And then number one, segueing into like the public school experience versus charter. So number one, being an education major, one of the things that when you did your internship is you had to go through a module of like lesson planning. Shout out to Florida Memorial University, HBCU, number one in the state for producing quality teachers. But anyway, one of the things that we had to learn really well was the lesson planning. That's when lesson planning was like 3 to 4 pages. Because you spoke about like affective domain, cognitive, psychomotor, like all of those things. So when it kind of reminded me when we got to the charter schools of how I used to plan way back when. So then there was a period in my career when I first started teaching where nobody was asking me for lesson plans. Nobody was coming by to check for lesson plans. Once I had the numbers, from in the data, nobody came by to check anything. Right. They just asked me what I wanted, right? And then fast forward to, like you said, in this, in the charter school network, I actually am a fan of the lesson plan process. Right. And JG, you said that, after looking at the lesson plan is actual data that you collect, right? So say, for instance, you look at a lesson and you're just like, last time I taught this, like last year, whatever, X, Y, Z, happened in the data. So while it shouldn't be, like you said, stringent, the lesson plan should be fluid. It should be fluid, right? But it's like a roadmap, like Leisha said, to get to an end point, because we all understand, even in the planning process where our coaches had us plan for like misconception or like what the gaps and what were students. And it was like, sometimes you would plan for those and they say put in the back pocket questions. Right. But sometimes there would be a question or something that would happen that you didn't even anticipate, right? So in the moment, your teacher skill from previous lesson planning allowed you to respond in the moment to that question or the instance. But I wanted to really pinpoint, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? Students know, because the lesson planning is not necessarily for you. It is for students. Everything we do in schools is for the service of students. Right? So your leader is not specifically judging you, criticizing you, evaluating you on your ability to necessarily just like be able to meet these deadlines and turn them in, but they are for the purpose of teaching and learning, right? So all leaders in the building should have a chance to have their eyes on the lesson plan. That's one of the lifelines, in the school.
Yeah. Leisha, any thoughts on what Dr. Bethel just said?
Yeah, I think for me, so several things come up, right? Jamal, when you were saying that you didn't like to plan because you felt like you're supposed to trust me as a teacher, I think many teachers feel that way. And that feeling is heightened when you feel like there is a lack of trust, right? Because if your coach is asking for plans, or if you get the sense that your coach is asking for a deliverable simply to check it off and not realistically to use that to help you grow, then it is going to, it then builds that mistrust. Like, oh, you just want me to do something to appease you, not for my sake of growing, right? And that's one thing as a leader that I never want to do. I want to be purposeful. It's like a purpose over power. I never want to ask for something. Episode 1. When it's not, it means nothing to me. So that also comes in, like teachers who are becoming leaders, that's something that you want to reflect on before doing so. Is don't lose your teacher self, right? Remember your teacher self when you become a leader. You never want to have your coachee feel like, oh, they're a coach and they're just exerting their power over me because they can do this, they're doing it. You always want to make it purposeful. Another thing I wanted to say was that your plan is just your plan. It's just that. It is not something to be so rigid about. It is not something to be like, oh my God, what was the next step in my plan? No, the students always come first. What's in front of you always comes first. How the students are responding to your instruction is how ultimately you should pivot, right? It should like based on student response. It should never be, I'm so rigid and I have to memorize my plan. No, by you planning, you're internalizing your instruction. So now when you're executing it, it's like, okay, this is what I planned for. But like you said, you don't know. You plan for misconceptions and the kids be like, oh, I know that already. That's not a misconception. So it's just a plan. It's just a plan. Lastly, I want to say as a coach, I think what reading my coachees' lesson plans helped me do is help me understand them as teachers and as learners. So when my coachee is because okay, I don't know how much to say, but
just
the general.
In my experience, right, a teacher that I coached, her planning, wasn't that great. And what I mean by that is I can tell that this person copy and pasted from the network materials and just put it in a PowerPoint slide. That tells me as a coach, well, and then let me say this, and then when I would observe, it was exactly what I thought it would be, right? Like just reading the slides verbatim. No real intellectual internalization of what the point A is, and you're getting kids to point B. She didn't know that, and it was obvious in her planning. So back to the initial question, should plans be mandated? I wouldn't be able to, as a coach, draw that connection to say, okay, this is where the disconnect is. This person doesn't actually understand what they're getting, what they need to get kids to do to get to this point. So then it's just additional information for the coach to now assess, okay, great, this is the growth area for this individual.
Yeah. Go ahead. No, you go ahead, Dr. Bethel.
No, something that Leisha just said. There is a specific science to teaching, right? And it is very apparent, it is very evident and you're aware when someone has not planned. And even students, because they can tell when teachers are fumbling through a lesson. Or like they haven't, like you said, really even prepped, right? Or looked at material, if you will. Like there have been several times as a leader where I walked into class and I was like, this is a disaster right now, right? But the thing is, even experienced teachers need to at least plan to some degree. While it might not be as extensive as the first or second year teacher where they're scripting in, the directions and everything. But even as me, years later when I was teaching, they wanted you to carry the clipboard around and everything with the lesson plan. I couldn't do it because trying to look at the actual lesson plan after I made it was throwing me off. And I was like, no. I know this lesson plan. Let me go.
You internalize it.
It's in my mind, and I need to actually respond to kids in real time, right?
I'm seeing.
Exactly. So I think that, and then you can tell, like you said, if a teacher has not planned,
they're married to their clipboard, or at least that's what I've seen.
And they're not actually really responding to what they see. And it's like fake feedback to kids. And it's like, you're not actually reading that. And the kids know it. Then the kids will do the fake work, but that's a whole nother subject again.
Right.
But yeah.
So, Dr. Bethel, you have the most experience out of all of us, right? What if an experienced teacher comes in the door? First day on the job.
And does what?
Does what? Teachers. But they just got hired. First, first week on the job or first month on the job. Are you mandating lesson plans from that experienced teacher who might be coming in the door with 15 years under their belt? Are you mandating that they submit lesson plans?
For sure.
Why? I'm an experienced teacher. I know what I'm doing, baby. So why should I have to submit lesson plans to you
who might have a different setting,
who might have less experience than I do?
Because it's not about you, and the students in learning.
Okay.
So if we ensure that the students within our building are learning, again, we need to progress monitor. We need to capture this data, right? I'm not checking you. I am checking to see the quality of instruction for my kids. So my concern is not your pride, your experience as a teacher. Yeah, you have the years, but guess what? I need you to put that pen to page. I need you to put that lesson plan in place, and I need you to implement it. Not saying just because you can write a bomb-ass lesson plan, you will be a bomb-ass teacher. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, if you got the experience, honey, money talks and the rest walks. Put it down on paper, and go in there, implement it, and let me see you do what you said you can do. And if you're not cut,
I also want.
Go ahead, Miss Williams.
I also wanted to say that. So I understand that you're coming in with a certain amount of years of experience, but let's just be clear: time doesn't equal depth. Number one, and number two, like.
Leisha, can you say that one more time? Time doesn't equal what?
Time doesn't equal depth, right? So, again, there's varieties and there are different perspectives on what excellence and effectiveness looks like. You can be coming from a school or a network that thought that 60% mastery was effective, and you are the star of this team because this school started out at 20% mastery. But you're coming to a school now, 15 years later, where 85% is mastery, and that's the bar. So your years kind of mean nothing because you still need to grow to meet our bar.
Thank you.
Not that it means nothing, but everyone again is on a path. Like Jamal said, right, on a path to their own journey, own growth. Everybody is in different places. Just like a teacher of 15 years may be a master at analyzing data, but may not be a master at
the content,
effective discussion. Effectively leading or facilitating a discussion, or your questioning, your roadmap may not get kids where they need to be as effective as a teacher who's been teaching for 2 years, right? So it's just teaching comes with we always say our teacher toolbox. It's a variety of skills that shape you into a quote unquote good teacher or effective teacher. Yeah.
Got it.
Agree.
Yeah,
Agreed.
Those were some real salient points that actually has me thinking and reflecting on my mindset, which becomes our attitudes about things, which then becomes what we actually do. When I first started teaching, I'll be honest, I even still am a little like, if I were to go back into the classroom right now, I know submitting lesson plans is going to be a sticking point for me. And that's just me being transparent, open, and honest about it. Because I do see the value and the impact and everything like that. But human nature would take me to that place of like, I don't want to be submitting lesson plans. But, the thing that for me is more, I don't want to say more important, but above, I guess, the lesson plan question for me is the relationship between coach and coachee, teacher and leader, that exists, right? Because I don't think that lesson plans and submitting lesson plans can live in a vacuum. And one of the points that I had made in response to the post was, there are many factors to be considered to determine the response to that question. And to me, one of the factors is the relationship that exists between the coach and the coachee, or the teacher and the leader, right? That and this is going back to something about Leisha, that as a leader, I don't want you submitting lesson plans for the sake of submitting lesson plans, right? Or for the sake of me checking off a box on my to-do list. And I think that for education in general, the system of education in general, and the system of school administration in general has become this checking off of the boxes across the entire system. I believe that that's what it has become as a general. Well, this is what school. This is part of the leadership narrative, right? And I think that for teachers, they have believed that, so they have become disenchanted with a number of these requests that leaders make, right? Because they see it as, no, you're just checking off a box. Like, you're not actually invested in what's going on in my classroom and my growth. And I think that that's where the relationship has to be prioritized over the tasks. Because I'll be honest, in my last school, I strongly suggested that the leadership in their retreat do a analysis of the type of leader that to. And everyone on the team actually got task oriented. And mines came back as relationship oriented. And I did some further, research, investigation, analysis, reflection on what that meant, because I kind of felt like the oddball out, because I think in school leadership, we're kind of like trained to
deprioritize relationships.
You got a lot of stuff going on.
I don't got time.
You got to get to it. You got to get to these things, because it's all about the numbers. But I took a very different approach to it, where no, I want to make sure that me and you learn me, I learn you, I seek to understand and to be understood, you do the same thing, and that our relationship is what is prioritized here, so that I am truly invested in your professional development as an instructor in the classroom and a classroom manager, that your lesson plan is just one assurance or insurance step in that, or measure of accountability, but it's not the end all be all of our relationship.
So can I add? Can you
go ahead?
Yeah, we can hear.
So first of all, I want to make a point of clarification. So in my dissertation, in my research, right?
Okay,
go ahead.
Google me.
Anyway.
Okay. but no, it's a really good study. It's a really good research project where I actually studied 2 high-performing schools, which happen to serve students in low-income minority, community, right? And 2 things that you just stated, JG, stood out. So I think that you said it's a blanket approach with leadership and requiring such tasks and things. I think that happens in ineffective schools, right? Because in high-performing and effective schools, the narrative and the experiences are different, right? So let me tell you why. Here's why. So in these high-performing schools where leadership is effective, the culture and climate is so different, right? The teachers, like you just mentioned, mindsets, right? Around tasks, around requirements, around things, they always look at things as opportunities to grow. So out of growth mindset, you saw a lot of, my coach comes to observe me. I turn them lessons. They give me feedback. Oh my God, it is so great. Then in ineffective schools, it's child, they require me to do X, Y, and Z. Right?
Am I getting observed today?
Exactly.
Oh my gosh.
Jeez, I can't.
In high performing, and then guess what? These schools, and not saying that data is the end all be all, but these schools are always at the top of their network each and every year. And guess what? Beat out the
district.
And they're within their network, but then they also beat out other schools in other districts, right? Because the mindset, again, is different about how they look at lesson plans, how they look at the requirements that are mandated, within their school. So I want to differentiate between ineffective leadership and effective, because you made a very poignant statement, JG. You said, I am relationship oriented. And mostly all of the teachers who I interviewed stated that they had good relationships with their leaders. That they trusted their leaders, that they had their best interests at heart. And if they ever got into a classroom and they ever felt like they could not successfully teach or implement, they knew that they had a safety net within their leadership to come behind them and support them.
Right,
so
right.
Shout out to charter schools. I know charter schools get a bad rep, but I am converted.
Right.
You know? So
wow, that's a bold statement, honey.
I know.
You converted, honey.
Fight me. What?
For the doc, from the doctor, honey.
I don't want no problem.
Because somebody put on the post, oh, it's not realistic, and you're in the student, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, maybe we need to break these schools up and go charter, but that's a whole other subject.
That's a whole nother subject.
For another day.
For a whole nother day.
Yeah, fight me.
Yeah, I absolutely, that resonates a lot with me. The whole structure and system of the actual school, right? I think that right there is another thing that has to be strategically thought about, has to be thoughtful in general, and has to allow for lesson plans to become or to be seen as a useful, important, impactful, effective way of ensuring improved and increased results for students. And I love what you just said, Dr. Bethel, that it's not about us. And I think for many teachers, because teaching is such a personal profession, it's personal to us, right? Because nobody just gets up in the morning and say, oh, I want to be a teacher today, you know? So because of all of the things, challenges that come along with it. So I think it's important that teachers remember that it's not about them, right? And or rather, it's less about them and more about whatever needs to take place or to happen in order to ensure that the best interest of students and their performance is being
met.
Is being met. So all right, so let's wrap it up. You know, we promised we're going to keep this one short, straight and to the point. So any particular homework for our listeners in regards to thinking about whether or not lesson plans should be mandated? Let's do a quick whip around of what is like a closing statement that you think could be a homework. Let's start with you, Miss Leisha.
Okay. If you're a coach or have a team that you are leading, what resonated with me, and you guys have pushed me on this in our own private conversations, which is that the people that we are coaching have different mindsets. And if they're coming to the table with self-limiting beliefs that they can't do something or they're not effective at planning or teaching, it is our job as coaches to kind of build them up, right? And establish that growth mindset. Not for them, but kind of start that for them to allow them to know that, hey, you're not good at something today, but that doesn't mean that this is going to be, feelings are not forever, or feelings are not facts, right? This doesn't have to be the end of the story. And you guys pushed me on that about, in our own conversation. And since then, I'll say that I've been trying to open up to be more relationship oriented with my coachees to kind of get a better understanding of why those self-limiting beliefs even are there. And I think, again, having that context as a coach allows you to understand your coachee and help them grow in the areas that they are interested in growing in.
Yeah.
What about you, Dr. Bethel?
Yeah, my last piece is that lesson plans do help teachers grow, like you said, Ms. Williams, over time. And then also, like if you were a mechanic or a doctor, you wouldn't show up to fix a car or see a patient without the correct tools. right? And not saying that kids need to be fixed. Let's be clear. What I'm saying is you would not show up to do a job without the necessary tools, and lesson plans are your necessary tools to do your job.
Right. I guess my closing remarks on it is very, very similar to Leisha's, and it's around mindset, right? That I would say to challenge your current thinking around lesson plans and lesson plans being submitted, right? Whether it is required or not required, right? Because even if it's not required or not mandated, sometimes getting that second opinion on your lesson plan, even if it's from the person that teaches in the classroom next to you, or someone in your friend group, or even if it's just the beginning of your lesson, or just the heart of your lesson, or just the end of your lesson, to get some sort of feedback from someone that you trust can be worthwhile. And it can be the one thing that makes your lesson and your instruction more effective, right? So I would strongly suggest challenging your thinking on it. And if it's something that you are completely against, take baby steps, right? Just have somebody that you trust look over or look at and provide some feedback on one part of your lesson. They don't even have to see the lesson plan. You might just ask them, hey, so I'm thinking about doing this. What are your thoughts? Because, feedback is a gift in general. Not from everybody, but, but it can really, really help to some degree, in some kind of way. So, well, that brings us to the end of this episode 4, I want to believe. So this is a month now that we've been doing this. Shout out to all those who have supported over the last coming weeks. Make sure that you add us on Instagram at the TEAchers WORKroom Podcast, on Facebook at the TEAchers WORKroom Podcast. We're now on YouTube at the TEAchers WORKroom Podcast, and our podcast can be heard on all major platforms that stream podcasts, particularly on Anchor FM, on Spotify, and on Apple Podcast at the TEAchers WORKroom Podcast. So make sure you subscribe, and we'll see you or talk to you next week. Bye.
Have a great week, guys.
Peace
Bye.
and blessings.